Hi, my name is Olga. Welcome to my channel.
Raymond couldn't see her face, only the reflection of the streetlight in the window beside him, and even that was enough to tell him she was fighting not to panic. He sat in the back of the car with his hands bound and his coat still damp from the rain, trying not to shift too much, because the man beside him had already hit him once for moving. The ride was rough enough to make every street seem shorter than it was, every turn feel like a trap. He had been taken out of the prison van only moments earlier, shoved into this smaller car, and now the city was passing by in fragments. A storefront, a dark doorway, a cyclist bent low over his handlebars. All of it sliding past as if Lion itself had decided not to look directly at what was happening inside the vehicle. Lucie sat beside the driver, very still. She had dressed for the meeting as if she were going to a routine interview, not a rescue. Dark coat, plain hat, no unnecessary movement. But the stillness was not calm. It was concentration so intense it had become something colder than fear. Her right hand rested in her lap, hidden by the coat, where the pistol was tucked out of sight. She could feel the shape of it every time the car jolted, and each time she felt it, she had to remind herself that a weapon was not a plan. It was only one part of a plan that had already gone wrong once. Across the windshield, the driver's jaw was clenched tight enough to show the muscle moving under his skin. He had the look of a man trying to convince himself that he was in control of a situation that had already started slipping. On the outside, the car moved with purpose. On the inside, every second was stretched thin. Lucie looked ahead and counted the street corners without moving her lips. 1, 2, 3. The convoy route had changed before. It could change again. That was the problem with any plan built on occupied streets. It never belonged fully to the people making it. She had spent weeks trying to pull information from clerks, guards, railwaymen, anyone who might know when the prisoner would be transferred. She had already gone to see Klaus Barbie once, speaking to him face to face, pretending to be only a desperate woman asking for the man she loved. It was one of the worst conversations of her life, and also one of the most important, because every time she sat across from him, every carefully chosen word had to do two jobs at once. Sound believable, hide the real purpose. Now they were in the middle of the thing she had spent all that time building toward. The driver slowed at a bend near the Boulevard des Hirondelles, and Lucie felt the change in the car before she saw it. Tension moved through the cabin. Raymond lifted his head. The man beside him swore under his breath. Ahead, the road opened just enough for the parked car to angle in and block part of the lane. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Lucie saw the man on the sidewalk. A signal. Not obvious, not theatrical, just a figure in a coat turning his head at exactly the right moment. That was the cue. She opened the door, the street air hit her face first, cold and sharp, and then the sound came. Shouted orders, footsteps, a sudden burst of panic from the men guarding the prisoner car. Lucie moved before her fear could catch up. She had rehearsed this in her head so many times that her body already knew the first 3 steps. Out of the car, along the side, keep low, do not freeze. A guard turned toward her, surprised more than alarmed. Surprise could be useful if you used it quickly enough. She raised the pistol. Everything happened at once after that, but not in a clean or cinematic way. Real violence is messy and badly timed and full of nearlies. One of the resistance men rushed the rear door. Another came from the blind side of the street. A shot cracked out and shattered the window of the prison vehicle. Someone shouted Raymond's name. Someone else shouted in German. The driver tried to reach for his weapon and went half out of the seat before Lucie saw him and fired. The sound was deafening in the narrow street. She would remember later that the first thing she noticed after the shot was not the body, not the blood, not the screaming. It was the sudden absence of control. The clean little machine she had built from fear, timing, false papers, and desperate hope was no longer a machine. It was a brawl in the rain. Raymond was dragged out through the open door by 2 men so fast he nearly stumbled. His face looked wrong for a moment, as if he had not yet understood that the door was open because she had made it open. He had bruises on his cheekbone and dried blood near his mouth, but he was alive, and that was enough to flood Lucie's mind with a fierce, almost stupid relief. Then she saw the second guard running toward them from the rear of the street, and the relief vanished instantly. "Move!" she shouted. No one needed the order twice. Raymond was shoved toward the parked car. One of the resistance men took a bullet grazing his shoulder and still kept running. Lucie grabbed the prisoner by the arm and felt how thin he had become, how close he was to being only a man-shaped absence. He looked at her then, really looked, and for one disorienting moment the whole rescue seemed to narrow to that glance. Not the guns, not the street, not the years of resistance and arrests and coded messages, just the fact that he was here, and she had reached him. A German truck appeared at the end of the boulevard. Lucie saw it too late to do anything except react. The men on the street fired toward it, trying to slow it, trying to make it hesitate. The truck lurched, swerved, and then stopped at an angle that blocked the far side of the road. More voices, more boots, more men than they had counted on. Of course, there were always more men than you counted on. She pushed Raymond into the back seat and climbed in after him, pistol still raised, while the driver, not the Gestapo driver, their own, slammed the car into gear with shaking hands. The tires skidded hard on the wet pavement, and for one frightening second, Lucie thought they would never get the car moving at all. The vehicle lurched forward, almost clipping the curb, then shot into the street as gunfire ripped behind them. Raymond was breathing hard beside her. He tried to speak and couldn't. Lucie glanced back once. She saw the parked car they had used as cover, the men scattering in the rain, one of them bent double over his shoulder, another firing blindly at the truck. She saw a German collapse onto the pavement and another drag him backward by the collar. Then the curve of the street took the whole scene away. No one in the car spoke for several blocks. Only after they had turned twice and changed directions once more did Lucie let herself look at Raymond properly. He had the stunned, stripped-down face of someone who had expected death so fully that survival had become almost hard to understand. She reached across the seat and touched his sleeve just once to make sure he was real. He looked at her hand as if it were the strangest thing in the world. "You came," he said. It was not a question, but it sounded like one. Lucie looked out the window at the passing dark and did not answer right away, because there was no clean answer to that. She had come because she loved him. She had come because the Germans had taken him. She had come because she had no other life left that made sense if she did not keep moving. All of that was true, and all of it would have sounded too small out loud. Instead, she said, "Keep your head down." The car hit a bump and Raymond winced. The driver muttered something under his breath, then took another turn so sharp Lucie had to brace her hand against the door. Somewhere behind them, the city was still erupting with the aftermath of the ambush. Sirens would come soon, if they hadn't already. Search teams, roadblocks, questions. The kind of questions that led to torture if the answers ran out. She knew that. She knew what came after a rescue like this. She also knew they were not safe yet, not by a long way, because every successful escape leaves a trail behind it, and trails are what the Gestapo loved most. But for the moment, Raymond was in the car. Raymond was breathing, and the night had not taken him back yet. Outside, Lion kept moving under black rain, and Lucie sat with her pistol in her lap, her heart hammering so hard it felt like another person trapped in her chest, while the car raced toward roads she could not fully trust, with men she could not fully see, and with one question refusing to leave her mind. How long before the city realized what she had just done? The rain had barely stopped when Lucie knocked on the door, and Klaus Barbie let her in as if she were a woman asking for help instead of a woman trying to outthink him. That was the first shock of it. Not the building, not the uniforms, not the armed men in the hall. It was how ordinary the moment felt from the outside. A hallway with polished shoes, a chair pulled back from a desk, a man taking a cigarette from a silver case. If Lucie had wanted to scream, this was the wrong room for it. Everything in there was built to swallow emotion and turn it into paperwork. Barbie stood when she entered, but only just. He was smaller than his reputation, which made him worse, not better. The men who frighten people most often look like people you might pass on the street. He studied her with the same flat attention a clerk might give a form that has one line left unfilled. Lucie kept her face still. Not blank, still. There is a difference. Blank looks rehearsed. Still looks composed. "I want to see my husband," she said. Her voice did not crack. That mattered. If it cracked, Barbie would hear weakness. If it was too cold, he would hear strategy. She needed something in between, something exhausted enough to sound human and controlled enough to sound determined. She had practiced this balance in her head all the way there. Even now, standing in front of the man who had already helped ruin her life, she knew one small mistake could turn the room. Barbie did not answer right away. He looked at her hands. Lucie realized at once that he was reading her the way hunters read tracks. The angle of the fingers, the tension at the wrist, the absence of a ring. He knew she was trying to appear calm, and he was deciding whether that calm came from courage or stupidity. Maybe both. He liked people he could classify. It made them easier to break. "You have already been told," he said at last, in French that was almost polite. Lucie met his eyes. "Then tell me again." A hint of amusement moved across his face and disappeared. That was dangerous. Not because it meant he was amused, but because it meant he had noticed her. Barbie had the look of a man who enjoyed the process of noticing someone under pressure. He took a drag from his cigarette, then walked around the desk slowly, as if giving himself time to decide how much pressure to apply. "Your husband is not the only man in custody," he said. "You asked for one prisoner as if this were a family matter." Lucie kept her jaw steady. She wanted to say that yes, it was a family matter, and yes, it was also war, and yes, she would make it both if she had to. Instead, she let a small silence settle between them. Silence was useful when the other man thought he was leading. "I am asking for information," she said. "If you want a negotiation, make it one." That was the line that changed the temperature in the room. Not because Barbie was surprised. He was too skilled for surprise. It changed because she had crossed a boundary he expected women like her to avoid. Desperation was acceptable. Initiative was not. He studied her a moment longer, then turned toward the window as if the answer might be somewhere outside the room. Lucie had learned before this visit that Barbie liked to test people with delay. He made them wait because waiting creates a tiny, poisonous sense of dependence. So she waited. She did not shift her weight. She did not reach for her coat. She did not look at the guards by the door. Every second she stayed still, she reclaimed a little territory. At last he asked, "Why do you think your husband is valuable enough for discussion?" "Because you know he is," she thought. "Because you are the one who took him. Because you are trying to make me beg and I will not." But none of those answers would help. "He has names," she said, "and he has not given them." It was a gamble, not a lie exactly. Raymond knew things. So did many prisoners. But the way Barbie reacted mattered more than the literal truth. The word names made Barbie look at her more carefully, and Lucie knew she had touched the right nerve. He was thinking now, not about Raymond as a person, but about Raymond as a locked box. Barbie returned to the desk and rested one hand on its surface. "You are very confident for a woman with no leverage." Lucie almost smiled, but not quite. That word, woman, always carried more weight in that room than it should have. He was using it the way weak men use a knife they think no one will notice. She let it sit there. "I came here by myself," she said. "That is leverage." He laughed once, softly, as if she had made a charming mistake, but she saw the calculation behind it. Barbie was not laughing because she found him funny. He was laughing because she had just shown him she would walk into his office with no protection and still speak like she had a right to be there. That made her harder to dismiss and harder to crush quickly. He asked her to sit. She did. The chair was too low. He knew that too. Everything in the room had been arranged to shrink the visitor. The desk was higher than necessary. The lamp threw the light forward, not evenly. The walls seemed to close in if you stared at them too long. Lucie put both hands in her lap and waited for him to begin the part of the interview where he tried to make her lose track of herself. Instead, he opened a file. She saw the top page only for a moment, but it was enough to raise the tension in her stomach. Dates, a name, another address. He did not need to say it was surveillance. She already knew. He was showing her that the Gestapo had eyes on far more than her husband. They had been watching routes, contacts, meeting places. That meant the network was already under strain. It also meant he wanted her to understand that he knew more than he had told her. "Your friends are careless," he said. Lucie did not answer. "Or very brave," he added. "The result is often the same." He said it in the voice of a man who admired competence even when it belonged to his enemies. Lucie hated that most of all. Not the cruelty. Cruelty was simple. Admiration was more intimate. Then he said the thing she had been expecting and fearing. "If you want another conversation," he said, "you will cooperate." He did not define cooperate. He did not need to. The word did enough work by itself. Information, names, meetings. A betrayal disguised as conversation. Lucie felt the room narrow around that single offer. Barbie was not trying to persuade her with kindness. He was showing her the shape of the cage and giving her a choice about how much she wanted to touch it. She looked at the file on his desk and thought of Raymond in custody, hurt and stubborn, trying not to break. She thought of the prison van on the street. She thought of the men who had helped her get there, and the men who might already be under arrest because they trusted the wrong messenger. Barbie wanted panic, and panic would make her honest in the worst possible way. So she did something simpler. She asked a question. "Why do you think I came here alone?" He stared at her for a fraction of a second too long. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Men like Barbie built their control on the assumption that people would behave as expected. They expected pleas, tears, threats. He had prepared for all of those. He had not prepared for a woman who could sit in front of him and redirect the room with one sentence. Because now he had to answer, or pretend not to answer, and either choice gave her a little more time. "I think," he said carefully, "that you believe love makes you clever." Lucie held his gaze and said nothing. The silence that followed was heavier than any confession would have been. Barbie understood then that she was not there to save herself. She was there to extract what she could, to measure him, to make him reveal his habits the way a locksmith listens to a lock. He hated that he had to think about her that way, which meant he now had to think about her at all. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed, softer, less theatrical, more dangerous. "There is a train leaving tomorrow," he said. "If your husband has value, perhaps he can still be moved." Lucie kept her face still, but inside she heard the words click into place like a key in a door. A train, a transfer, the possibility of movement. He was offering a route, or pretending to. Either way, he had spoken the kind of detail she had come for. And because she had come for it, because she had spent every step of the walk telling herself not to appear hungry, she had to hide the fact that it mattered more than anything else in the room. Barbie leaned back in his chair and watched her as if he were already waiting to see whether she would ask the next question. Lucie took one slow breath, then another, and felt how close she was to the edge of losing the whole performance by being too interested in the answer. "What time?" she asked. Lucie knew the answer before Barbie gave it, and that was the worst part. He let the silence stretch long enough to make her regret asking, then glanced toward the window as if the time might be written on the glass. It was a small performance, but an effective one. Men like him understood that uncertainty could do more work than threats. When he finally looked back at her, his face had settled into the expression of a man who had decided to give away just enough information to make the other person feel chosen. "Tomorrow evening," he said, "not at the prison." Lucie kept her hands still in her lap. Inside, she felt the whole shape of the day shift. Not at the prison meant a transfer, a convoy, a route that could be intercepted, if she could get the details fast enough and get the right people in place. But right now, she could not afford to look eager. Eagerness was a mistake in rooms like this. Barbie could smell it. He reached for a cigarette, then changed his mind and set the pack back down. That tiny hesitation told her more than the answer had. He was enjoying the pressure he had placed on her, but he was also careful. Careful men are dangerous because they believe their caution makes them moral. Barbie wanted her to understand that he controlled the timing. He wanted the illusion that he was granting her a chance. "What road?" she asked. His eyes sharpened. There it was, the real question. Not about her husband as a person, about the route, the movement, the vulnerability. "You are asking many questions for someone who came here only to beg. I came here to understand what I am being refused." That landed. Not because it was clever, but because it made her sound less like a supplicant and more like a negotiator. Barbie rose and walked to the edge of his desk. He was close enough now that Lucie could see the pale line where his collar met his neck, the careful smoothness of a man who liked discipline more when it belonged to others. He looked down at her as if deciding whether he should punish her for the change in tone. Instead, he said, "The Boulevard des Hirondelles." Lucie did not move. She knew that street. Everyone in Lyon knew it well enough to fear it after dark. A clean, broad stretch with enough side streets to trap a car and enough open road to leave no room for hesitation. A bad place for a rescue, unless someone had a precise plan, and even then, only barely. She let the name settle in her mind without showing it. Barbie watched her for a reaction and found almost nothing. That was a risk. He might infer that she had enough discipline to be dangerous. Or he might decide she was simply slow. Lucie preferred slow, because slow people are underestimated and underestimated people survive longer. He sat again, steepled his fingers, and spoke in a tone so mild it was almost worse than anger. "You will not interfere." Lucie looked at him for a beat too long. That was the game now. He would give an order and wait to see whether she flinched. She would refuse to flinch and wait to see whether he noticed the refusal. Each of them was trying to force the other into revealing what mattered most: the prisoner in the convoy, the timing, the route, the hidden network of men and women who would have to move before dawn. She lowered her eyes first, not because she had lost, but because she had already taken what she needed from the room. Barbie interpreted the gesture correctly enough to be satisfied, which was all she required. He handed her a sheet of paper with an address written on it. "If you want to discuss terms, bring identification." "Whose identification?" she asked. He smiled, and the smile was colder than anything in the room. "Yours." Lucie took the paper and folded it once, then again, so carefully that Barbie could not tell whether her fingers were steady, out of fear, or control. In truth, they were steady because the fear had already moved somewhere else. It had become useful. She stood, thanked him in the driest tone she could manage, and allowed him to think the interview was ending on his terms. The guard outside opened the door before she reached it. The hall was the same as before: polished floor, rigid faces, a smell of cigarettes and damp wool. But now the building had changed for her. The place was no longer a fortress of mystery. It was a machine with seams, and she had seen one of them. Out on the street, the air felt too open. Lucie walked without hurrying. That mattered. Hurrying would tell the men watching her that she had learned something. She kept her head level, her shoulders loose, and her gaze on the traffic. A tram clanged in the distance. A bicyclist passed with a bundle tied to the rack. To anyone watching, she was simply a woman leaving an unpleasant appointment. Only when she reached the corner and turned out of sight did she allow herself to breathe fully. The relief lasted less than 10 seconds, because now she had the route, and a route meant a clock. Tomorrow evening was close enough to feel immediate and far enough away to be lethal. Every hour between now and then had to be used. The wrong messenger could unravel the plan. A misplaced word could send the Germans in another direction. If Barbie had lied about the road or changed it after she left, then everything she was about to set in motion would be wasted. She moved fast after that, but not in a way that drew attention. Lyon was full of people moving quickly for reasons they did not discuss. Women with baskets, clerks with papers, men late for work. In wartime, urgency can hide inside ordinary purpose. Lucie crossed 2 streets, then entered a narrow passage where the walls threw the sound of her footsteps back at her. Here at last, she could let the information settle, not at the prison. Boulevard des Hirondelles, tomorrow evening. She repeated it in her head the way someone repeats a name in case the spell of it helps memory hold. At the safe house, the door opened before she knocked twice. One of the young couriers looked at her face and immediately stepped aside without asking anything. That was the first sign that the news had already started to move without her. The second sign was the map spread across the table. Raymond was alive, or at least alive enough for the resistance to be reorganizing around him. Names had been crossed out, new ones added in pencil, routes marked and remarked until the paper looked exhausted. A man near the window was sharpening a blade that would never be used in the way blades are used in war films. A woman in a dark scarf was rolling bandages even though no one had asked her to. The room felt like the pause before a storm breaks. Except nobody there could afford to call it a pause. Lucie laid Barbie's paper on the table. All conversation stopped. The courier closest to her read the street name aloud once, then again, as if saying it twice might force it to become more manageable. Someone immediately asked for the car. Someone else wanted to know whether the convoy would be guarded by Germans or French auxiliaries. Lucie answered only what she knew. The rest would have to be guessed, tested, argued over. "Tomorrow evening," she said. He said, "Not at the prison." That changed the atmosphere in the room at once. A transfer was both worse and better. Worse because a convoy meant motion, and motion meant uncertainty. Better because motion meant an interception was possible. Nobody wanted to celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. But the room sharpened around the possibility. The map came back to life under their hands. The boulevard was too open for a simple attack, too visible for hesitation. And yet, the resistance men began marking angles and exits, as if the street itself could be convinced to cooperate. One of them suggested a parked car. Another suggested a traffic snarl. Lucie listened, then interrupted. "If he's being moved, they'll expect trouble," she said. Not enough to stop it, just enough to make them ready. That was the trap. The Germans did not need certainty to become dangerous. Suspicion was enough. If Barbie knew there might be resistance, he would load the convoy differently, arm the guards more heavily, and choose a route that punished any attacker who mistimed the strike. The risk was no longer whether they could find the convoy. It was whether they could create enough confusion in one tight stretch of road to reach the prisoner before the guards understood what was happening. One of the men asked the question no one wanted to ask. What if he's moved twice? Lucie looked at him, then at the map, then back at the street name. It was the right question, and there was no good answer. If the route changed, they would have to learn it again before nightfall. If the convoy took another road, the whole plan might collapse into noise and blood. The room felt smaller for the asking of it. She reached for the pencil, underlined the boulevard once, and said, "Then we make sure they don't have time to move him twice." No one spoke after that. Outside, the city continued with the strange indifference of occupied places. Trams kept moving. Doors kept opening and closing. Somewhere a dog barked at nothing. But inside the room, the next day had already started, and everyone there knew it. Raymond was no longer a prisoner in a building. He was a prisoner in motion, which meant the window to save him was shrinking by the hour. Lucie folded the paper and slipped it into her coat. Her hand brushed the pistol at her waist, and for a moment, the weight of it felt less like a weapon than a promise she had not yet decided whether she could keep. Then the man at the table said, very quietly, "If the timing is wrong, we lose him." Lucie looked up at the map, at the boulevard, at the lines their fingers had drawn across the city, and understood that everyone in the room was already measuring the same impossible thing. How many seconds of chaos could be created? How many men could be stopped? How far a car could be forced to drift before the streets swallowed the chance? She put both hands flat on the table and stared at the street name until it stopped looking like ink and started looking like a place where people would either live or die. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs outside, slow and deliberate, and every person in the room turned toward the door at once. Lucie was halfway to the door when the first shot cracked outside. The room did not explode into panic right away. Real panic takes a fraction of a second to understand itself. At first, there was only the sound, hard and flat, and the instant after that when every person in the room stopped moving to listen for a second shot. Then it came, and then another, and the whole place changed shape. No one had to say it out loud. The Gestapo had found something, or someone had led them here, or the route had already begun to collapse before they even left the table. Lucie moved first because if she waited for the others, she would be trapped in the room with their fear. She crossed to the window, pulled back the curtain just enough to look out, and saw two men in dark coats moving fast across the street below, guns out, heads low. "They're coming up," someone whispered. Lucie turned from the window and looked at the others. In that instant, she saw what she had not wanted to see all night, that every face in the room was doing its own calculation. Who runs first? Who stays? Who carries the map? Who leaves the pistol? These were not abstract choices anymore. They were just seconds wearing different clothes. The footsteps on the stairs stopped. Then came a voice from below, sharp and angry in German, followed by the slam of a door somewhere in the building. Not our floor, Lucie thought. Not yet. But the noise had already done what it was meant to do. It had broken the room's focus. Someone reached for the papers. Someone else grabbed the map and folded it badly, as if speed could forgive clumsiness. Lucie stepped to the table, took the pencil, and wrote one line on the back of the paper from Barbie's office. "Move now." That was all. No speech, no explanation. Everyone in the room already knew what it meant. They had run the timing as long as they could. They had argued over angles, over cover, over whether the convoy would be delayed by traffic on the boulevard, or whether the Germans would choose to move the prisoner through the side route. They had counted on confusion. They had counted on one car, maybe two, maybe a convoy that would hesitate for half a second when the road narrowed. But now, there were German footsteps in the building, and the entire shape of the operation had changed. What mattered wasn't whether the plan was elegant. What mattered was whether they could still reach Raymond before the convoy vanished into the city. Lucie took the written note and folded it into the lining of her coat. Then she looked toward the back exit. The youngest courier was already there, holding the door half open, his face pale and sharp with the kind of fear that makes people look older. He was waiting for orders. Everyone was waiting for orders. She hated that moment most of all, because it always asked the same thing of her. Become the person who decides who gets hurt. Down the stairs, she said, not together. No one argued. That was how bad the situation was. Bad enough that even the men who had been talking over each other a minute earlier now moved with a kind of dead precision. One by one, they crossed the room, dropped into the stairwell, and disappeared into the narrow dark below. Lucie was last except for one woman who stayed to gather the papers. She was burning them in the sink when Lucie looked back. The smell of singed paper followed her down the stairs. Outside, Lyon felt too bright. That was the terrible thing about danger in a city. It could be raining, it could be dark, it could be full of smoke, and still the street would insist on appearing normal from one angle. The bakery on the corner was open. A woman carried a bag of vegetables past a shuttered shop. A tram bell rang somewhere 2 streets over. Lucie kept her pace steady and did not look too quickly in any one direction. She needed to get to the boulevard, but she needed to get there as if she belonged there. That was what resistance had become. Not heroism, not slogans, just a series of performed normalities under pressure. She reached the side street by the boulevard and slowed behind a parked delivery cart. From there, she could see the road without exposing herself fully. The convoy was not there yet. The open street looked almost innocent, which made her more afraid than if it had already filled with uniforms. On the sidewalk across from her, a man lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Nearby, 2 women stood beside a bicycle and spoke too quickly to each other without really speaking. Lucie recognized one of them from the safe house. Good, more eyes, or worse, more people to lose. Then the first vehicle appeared. It rolled into the boulevard with brutal confidence. A dark car in front, then the prisoner transport, then a second escort vehicle behind it. Her chest tightened so suddenly, it felt like a hand had closed around her ribs. The convoy was real. The route was real. Everything they had spent the night building toward had become a moving target. She saw Raymond for only a second through the side window. He was sitting rigidly, his head turned slightly toward the front, and for one wild second, she wondered if he had sensed her somehow, if he could feel her somewhere on the street, the way some people feel rain before it starts. Then the car moved on, and the second escort vehicle followed, and the whole convoy became a single narrow line of threat, sliding past the curb. Lucie's signal had to be exact. Too soon, and the Germans would see it coming. Too late, and the convoy would already be through the kill zone. She glanced down the boulevard and saw her people in their places, hidden behind a cart, behind a wall, behind the angle of a doorway that looked useless, until it became the only thing between survival and failure. One of them caught her eye and gave the smallest nod. Now, Lucie thought, now. The first distraction came from the far side of the street, where a civilian car lurched into the road just enough to force the convoy to slow. Not an accident, nothing that obvious, just a terrible little hesitation, the kind that makes a driver curse and reach for the horn. At the same moment, a resistance man stepped out with a crate and let it fall hard enough to spill bottles across the pavement. Glass shattered, horses startled. A German in the rear escort shouted. The convoy slowed again. Lucie saw the opening. 3 men moved from the curb almost at once, one from the front, one from the side, one from the blind angle near the parked cart. The first gunshot was not hers, but the second was. The sound snapped through the boulevard, and every head turned toward it in the same instant. The convoy driver braked hard, the prisoner car lurched, and the whole street became a collision of motion, smoke, and shouting. Lucie ran. Not toward the gunfire, but toward the prisoner vehicle. This was the part that never made sense afterward to anyone who heard it told later. Why run toward the shots? Why not wait? Why not trust the others? But there are moments in a rescue where waiting is just another word for surrender. And Lucie knew that if she hesitated now, Raymond would be pulled farther away. The door would be locked again, and the chance would be gone. So she ran. A German guard turned toward her in surprise. She fired before he could finish the movement. Another man dove behind the rear car. Someone yelled from inside the convoy. The prisoner door had already been forced open by the men with her, and Raymond was being hauled out, half dragged, half carried, his feet scraping the street for a heartbeat before he found them. He looked terrible. That was the first thought that came to her. Not brave, not relieved. Terrible. Bruised, unsteady, the kind of exhausted that goes beyond the body and settles into the face. But he was alive, and once she saw that, everything else became secondary. She reached him and took his arm, and he stared at her as if the whole street had become impossible. There, she said. It was the only word that came out. A shot rang from behind them, and one of the men by the car shouted. Lucie pushed Raymond toward the cover of the side wall, while the others kept firing into the street. The Germans were reacting now, not thinking. They had been shocked for only a second, but that second had already done its work. The convoy had broken. Their rhythm was gone. People who rely on order are the easiest to panic once order fails. Lucie felt a sudden impact on her shoulder and stumbled sideways. Not a bullet, a body. One of her own men crashed into her as he dragged another prisoner free from the rear car. She caught herself against the wall and saw, just over his shoulder, the convoy driver trying to reverse. The street was too tight. The vehicle struck the curb, jolted, and stalled at an angle that made the whole road worse for everyone. There was shouting everywhere now, French, German, orders, curses. The noise had become so large that individual words no longer mattered. All that mattered was the movement of bodies, the opening of doors, the scramble for weapons, the way a single successful second could become 10 unmanageable ones if enough people were confused at once. Lucie pulled Raymond harder into the shadow of the wall. "Can you walk?" she asked. He looked at her, then at the street, then back again. "Yes," he said, though the word did not sound like certainty. "Then do not stop." They moved. A parked truck blocked the far end of the street, giving them just enough cover to break the line of sight. Lucie shoved Raymond toward it, while the others fanned out behind them. She heard more shots, then a burst of shouting from the German side that sounded too loud, too desperate. Someone had brought the wrong weapon for the moment. Someone had hesitated. The resistance had turned that hesitation into space. Raymond made it to the truck and braced one hand on the back of it, breathing hard. Lucie looked back once and saw the convoy still split in the boulevard. One car blocked, one man on the ground, smoke drifting low across the pavement. It did not feel like victory. It felt like surviving a door that had nearly slammed shut. Then she saw the face of the German officer standing at the far end of the street. He had not yet understood. That was the strangest part. He was still in the first stage of shock, still trying to reconstruct the shape of events from the fragments in front of him. Lucie knew that look. It was the look of a man realizing too late that the world had already shifted. He raised his pistol. Lucie grabbed Raymond by the sleeve and pulled him down behind the truck as the shot hit the metal side with a violent ping. And in that instant, with the air full of smoke and the street still collapsing into chaos around them, she felt the moment slip beyond rescue and into something else entirely.